Imagine waking up one morning and realizing an entire neighborhood, 96 brand new homes, has been built on your land. That's exactly what happened to one man who quietly watched his construction crews pour concrete, raise walls, and sold houses to families, all without knowing they were standing on property that legally wasn't theirs. This is a jaw-dropping true story of a black man who outsmarted a powerful homeowners association, HOA, a greedy developer, and an entire construction company, all by using one thing they didn't expect him to have: the deed. But how did this happen? How did 96 homes end up built on someone else's land without anyone noticing? And what happened when he finally revealed the truth in court? Let's rewind the story. The land in question, located in Atlanta's South DeKalb County, had been the man's family for generations, a tangible piece of their heritage. He held the title, a clear and legally recorded document proving his ownership. Yet for years, the heavily wooded, 10-acre parcel sat quiet, a peaceful, undeveloped heirloom. The trouble began when a developer with ambitions for a new suburban community set their sights on the area. Somehow, in a catastrophic failure of due diligence, the developer's team never uncovered a man's existing deed. Whether through a flawed title search, a boundary line error, or sheer arrogance, they mistakenly believed the land was theirs to develop. Bulldozers arrived, clearing the family trees. Foundations were poured, and the skeletons of new houses began to rise. And the man watched. He didn't raise an alarm immediately. Instead, he did something far more shrewd. He went as lawyer and secured the original, ironclad deed to his property. He knew that in the face of powerful, moneyed interests, a swift, emotional reaction would be dismissed. He needed irrefutable proof and a strategic plan. For months, he observed as the neighborhood, now known as the Brittany Springs subdivision, neared completion. Families moved in. Children played in yards, and the new homeowners association began operating, all on land they believed they legally owned. The developer collected profits, and the construction company moved on to its next project, oblivious to the ticking time bomb they had built. When the man finally made his move, it was with the force of legal certainty. He didn't just knock on a door, he filed a lawsuit. The resulting court case was a scene of pure disbelief. The developer and the HOA, representing all 96 homeowners, were served with papers stating a simple, devastating fact. They were trespassing. The houses, the roads, the parks, it all belonged to him. The courtroom revelation was chaos. How could this have happened? The developer pointed fingers. The HOA was thrown into panic, and the homeowners were faced with nightmare. Their biggest financial investment was built on a foundation of sand. The man's lawyer presented the deed, a document that trumped all their claims and sales contracts. In the end, the man held all the power. He had no desire to throw 96 families into the street, but he was rightfully entitled to compensation for his stolen property. The resolution was a monumental settlement. While the exact terms are confidential, it involved the developer and associated parties paying the man a sum rumored to be in the millions, effectively forcing him to buy the land he had already built on, but at a price and on terms he controlled. His victory was more than just financial. It was a triumph of patience and principle over carelessness and corporate greed. While the families kept their homes, the story serves as a stunning reminder of the power of a piece of paper and the quiet resolve of the man who held it, proving that sometimes the most powerful move is to simply wait and let your opponents build a case against themselves. Our story starts years earlier with a man named Mr. Green, a quiet, hard-working landowner in the southern United States. His family had owned a stretch of land for generations, a tangible heirloom passed down through wills and stories. It wasn't flashy, just 10 acres of open fields and quiet woods, but it was his. Crucially, it was the last piece of black-owned property in a rapidly developing area, a bastion of heritage against a rising tide of concrete and commerce. Mr. Green was a man of routine and principle. He paid his property taxes promptly, every year without fail. He kept his deed and other important paperwork in a sturdy, fireproof box, its contents as orderly as his life. He knew what his family's land meant. It was a legacy of resilience, a foothold of hard-won independence. As the city expanded, its tendrils of development creeping ever closer. Big-name developers began circling like hawks, buying up the surrounding farms and forests, turning them into sprawling subdivisions, shopping centers, and apartment complexes with names like Whispering Pines and Heritage Hills. But Mr. Green never sold. He politely but firmly declined every offer that arrived in his mailbox or was presented at his door by smooth-talking agents. The land was not a commodity to him. It was a covenant with his past and a potential gift for his future. He trusted that the system, the recorded deeds, the property lines, the rule of law, would protect what was rightfully his. Then, a pivotal shift occurred. A real estate developer, Progress Point Builders, bought the large, adjacent property. Their vision was ambitious, a high-density community of nearly 100 homes. And as they laid their plans, they apparently got greedy. The initial mistake was almost imperceptible, a flicker of negligence that would ignite a catastrophe. Whether by a careless under-pressure surveyor or by deliberate design to maximize their profitable footprint, their development plans included a crucial, fateful error. The boundary lines were redrawn, quietly absorbing a significant portion of Mr. Green's wooded acreage into their new project. It started small, invisible to the naked eye, a few lines blurred on a technical plat, a decimal point misplaced in a coordinate. In a county office, a digital file was approved based on flawed information. But on the ground, those lines soon manifested with brutal, irreversible physicality. One morning, the deep silence of Mr. Green's woods was shattered by the roar of heavy machinery. Bulldozers, operating with the confidence of those who believe they are in the right, began clearing not the developer's land, but his. Ancient trees, which had witnessed his family's history, were felled in minutes. Mr. Green watched, first with confusion, then with dawning horror, as the invasion continued. What began as cleared underbrush soon became the gravel beds for roads he hadn't authorized. Surveyor stakes marked out lots on soil that was legally his. Then came the cement trucks, pouring foundations for houses that would soon be sold to unsuspecting families. His family's legacy was being systematically erased, not by malice that shouted, but by arrogance that didn't bother to look. The developer was building a kingdom, and they had unwittingly, or perhaps willingly, laid its cornerstone on a foundation that did not belong to them. And Mr. Green, the quiet man with the fireproof box, knew he was in for the fight of his life. When Mr. Green noticed the first bulldozer cutting a fresh, raw gash across the familiar contours of his property, a cold certainty settled in his gut. He didn't rage or shout. He simply put on his work boots and walked straight to the site manager, a man in a hard hat and a reflective vest, clutching a rolled-up set of plans. He approached calmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Excuse me," he said, drawing the manager's attention away from the roaring machinery. "I think there's been a mistake. You're building on my land." The site manager, conditioned to deal with concerned neighbors, offered a patronizing smile. He didn't consult his maps. He didn't radio the office. He simply laughed, a short, dismissive bark lost in the sound of diesel engines. "Sir," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "our company bought this land legally and above board. You must be mistaken." He gestured broadly at the orchestrated chaos around them. "All this doesn't happen by accident." In that moment, Mr. Green understood everything. He wasn't dealing with a simple error that could be corrected with a conversation. He was facing a system, a powerful, moneyed entity, so convinced of its own infallibility that it wouldn't even entertain the possibility of being wrong. Arguing with a hired hand would be futile. Calling the police would likely result in a civil matter dismissal. A cease and desist letter from a lawyer might have stalled one bulldozer, but it would also alert the developer to the threat, giving them time to marshal their legal resources and bury him in paperwork. So, Mr. Green did something bold, something that required immense patience and fortitude. He stayed quiet. He gave a slight, non-committal nod to the site manager and walked away, a solitary figure retreating from the edge of the construction zone. But he didn't retreat far. He became a ghost, a silent sentinel watching from the tree line. He watched for months as the skeleton of the neighborhood rose from the soil of his heritage. He saw the roads paved not with asphalt, but with his rights. He watched as mailboxes were installed in a row, each one a marker on a map of his loss. For sale signs, bright and garish, popped up like poisonous mushrooms, followed by the triumphant banners of sold. His silence was not surrender, it was a strategy. While the developer bragged about the luxury community of Brittany Springs and glossy brochures, Mr. Green was in his lawyer's office, ensuring his deed was pristine, his tax records impeccable. He was building a case while they were building houses. He understood that the crime was not in the starting, but in the finishing. The greater the investment, the more complete the community, the more undeniable his position would be. He was allowing them to dig their own financial and legal grave, shovelful by shovelful. By the end of construction, 96 new homes stood proudly, their fresh paint and manicured lawns a stark contrast to the remaining wild edges of his land. Families moved in, dreaming their American dream. Children's laughter echoed in cul-de-sacs that shouldn't exist. The Homeowners Association was formed, establishing rules and covenants for a community that legally wasn't theirs to govern. The developer collected their final payments and moved on, boasting of another successful project. Everything looked perfect. The picture of suburban bliss. A thriving, vibrant neighborhood. Everything. Except the fact that every driveway, every garden, every foundation was sitting squarely, irrevocably, on land that still legally belonged to Mr. Green. The quiet man with the deed had let them build the entire prison, and he alone held the key. The final, ironic spark that lit the fuse was a piece of certified mail. The newly formed Homeowners Association, in its zeal to enforce uniform suburban perfection, sent Mr. Green a formal notice. It complained about unapproved structures, a small, dilapidated tool shed that stood on his family's land for 50 years, on the edge of what they now considered their domain. The sheer, unwitting audacity of it was breathtaking. They were not only occupying his land, they were now attempting to govern it. Mr. Green didn't get angry. He got ready. He contacted his lawyer, retrieved the original, crisply preserved deed from his fireproof box, and walked into the county courthouse, a monument of calm in a storm of his own making. The initial hearing was procedural, with the HOA's lawyers expecting a quick resolution over a minor zoning dispute. They were unprepared for the seismic shift that was about to occur. When Mr. Green's attorney presented their evidence, it wasn't a complaint. It was an enunciation. He laid the original deed on the clerk's desk. Then came the supporting documents. The chain of title, showing his family's ownership history, going back decades, unbroken and uncontested. Then the official survey maps, commissioned by his lawyer, which used the deed's metes and bounds to draw a perfect, damning red line around the entire Brittany Springs subdivision. The HOA's lawyers initially scoffed, but their confidence evaporated as the expert surveyor took the stand, pointing out how the developer's own plat had misaligned a decades-old boundary marker by several hundred feet. The signatures on the historic documents matched the county's records. The math was irrefutable. Every single plot, every winding street, every community park, all 96 homes, sat squarely within the boundaries of Mr. Green's legally held property. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. The judge, reviewing the documents with a deepening frown, realized the scale of the unimaginable failure. This wasn't a minor encroachment. It was a wholesale colonization. The developer's multimillion-dollar project, the pride of the portfolio, had no legal right to exist. They had built a castle on another man's soil. When the truth broke, panic spread like wildfire through the community. Homeowners who had invested their life savings were suddenly staring into an abyss. Their dream houses were, in the eyes of the law, unauthorized structures on land they did not own. Their mortgages were attached to worthless lots. The HOA, transformed from a petty enforcer to a desperate crisis manager, scrambled to respond. First came the offers, lowball sums meant to make the problem go away quietly. When that failed, they pleaded for mercy, invoking the families, the children, the shattered dreams. When mercy didn't work, the threats began. They hinted at protracted legal battles, countersuits for emotional distress, and the sheer financial weight they would use to crush him. They underestimated the quiet man. Mr. Green was unshaken. He had given them their chance. He had approached them with civility at the very beginning, only to be laughed off his own land. His patience had been their warning. His silence had been their opportunity to discover their own catastrophic error. Now he held all the cards. He wasn't a speculator. He was the title holder. The law, for once, was unequivocally on his side. The power had not been seized, but had simply, rightfully, returned a man who had held it all along. The battle was over almost before it began, and the quiet man with the single piece of paper had won. In the end, the gavel fell with the weight of finality, and the court ruled unequivocally in Mr. Green's favor. The judgment was clear. Every inch of that land, every paved driveway, every concrete sidewalk, every meticulously landscaped backyard belonged to him. The legal deed, a document that had slumbered in his safe for years, was now wide awake and had spoken with absolute authority. Panic turned to desperation for the developer. They scrambled to the negotiating table, checkbook in hand, offering a massive, one-time settlement to quietly buy the land they had already built upon. But Mr. Green, a man who had waited years for justice, was not interested in their quick, easy money. He understood that a simple payout would absolve them of all accountability. Instead, he wielded the legal process like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His goal was not just compensation, but consequence. Through relentless litigation, he ensured that the specific individuals and firms responsible, the surveyors who had falsified boundaries, the project managers who had ignored his initial, polite warnings, faced professional ruin, hefty fines, and permanent stains on their reputations. They had treated his heritage as a clerical error. He made sure they answered for it as a profound ethical and legal failure. His solution for the homeowners, however, was not one of vengeance, but profound and pragmatic power. Recognizing that evicting 96 families would make him no different than the heartless corporation that wronged him, he crafted a different future. He agreed to lease the land back to the homeowners, but strictly under his own terms. This meant the HOA and every single resident would now pay him annual ground rent for the right to stay on what was, and would always remain, his property. The poetic justice was exquisite. The same HOA board that once had the audacity to send him a violation notice for the color of his fence now had to formally address him as their landlord and cut him a check every year. The same developers who would brush him off with a condescending laugh were financially eviscerated, paying millions in court-ordered penalties and legal costs that dwarfed the profits they had briefly enjoyed. And Mr. Green? He didn't brag. He didn't gloat on television or give triumphant interviews. He simply returned to his life, a little more secure, his family's legacy not only intact but now fortified by a landmark legal precedent. When pressed by his lawyer for a comment, he just smiled, a quiet, knowing look in his eyes, and said, "All I did was protect what was mine." His story became legendary, a modern-day parable whispered in real estate offices and law schools alike. It was a real-life lesson in the potent combination of patience, intelligence, and an unwavering belief in justice. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent. It isn't a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it is the quiet power of the title holder, the supreme confidence of knowing the law is on your side. Sometimes it is simply stepping back and letting arrogant people build their own downfall, brick by brick and house by house, on the unshakable foundation of what is rightfully yours.